Howdy howdy, Sudevil here, and welcome to a video where we're going to talk about how to improve Flagellants. I recently did a video where I looked at the best and worst units from 401 gold to 600 gold, and out of the 23 units in that infantry on infantry evaluation testing, Flagellants finished 23rd. They were the absolute worst, and they were the worst by an absolute mile. They're right now they're in a really terrible place, and they're an utterly atrocious unit. And I got a little bit of discussion in the comments, and I've been thinking about these, and I thought, well, how could we improve Flagellants? What could we do to improve them? What would be some useful things? Now, first, I want to just demonstrate to anyone who doesn't know how weak Flagellants are, how weak they really are. So I set up a quick fight. We got our Flagellants here, and our settings are normal. And on the other side, I've got some basic Night Goblins at 400 gold. So we'll just go and see sort of how that comes out. You know, the Flagellants are 50% more. The Night Goblins don't have any armor or anything special, and they do have poison, but it's not like the Night Goblins are some spectacular unit. So we'll just go and see, get that fight going. I'll just fast forward it, and we've got our Flagellants on this side, and you can see the Night Goblins have, 8 more stat points just off the get-go. They do have a little less weapon strength, but really that's really making the difference. And you can see the Night Goblins are winning here, and sooner or later there's the Flagellants. Strength of the Penitent is proccing, and the Night Goblins are just gonna outright win. And this is one of the reasons why these Flagellants are so terrible, is because their abilities don't actually do anything to make them useful, and I think there's a lot of ways we could make them very useful. But anyways, just want to demonstrate this just against a basic group of Night Goblins. 400 gold, they clean up the Flagellants pretty easily. So we're going to end that battle, and you can see they lost about half of their troops. 61 Flagellants lost all of them. So we'll go to another battle. And one of the things I think Flagellants should be good against is things that cause fear and terror. This is going to be one of the motifs as I suggest improvements for them. And I really think they should be good against things that cause fear and terror, because they are fearless. They're unbreakable. They all think the end is near, they're going to die. And I'm going to go over one of the unit's cards that comes straight off the Games Workshop website, which is really cool. So anyways, a unit that I would think they should do really well against is a unit like a Crypt Ghoul. Doesn't have a whole lot of armor. They're 500 gold. They're less than the Flagellant. So I'm just going to show this battle here. And again, Flagellants have they have Frenzy, which doesn't make sense. I mean, I understand what they're trying to do, but it doesn't make sense because they don't need immunity to psychology. They just put it in there, obviously, to account for some of their abilities, which we're going to go look over. And they also have this Strength of the Penitent, which gives them melee defense if they're losing. Oh, so annoying. Gives them melee defense if they're losing, and let's see if we can get it to trigger here. Nope. There we go. Strength of the Penitent, 15 seconds, melee defense and physical resistance if they're losing. And here again, the Crypt Ghouls just demolish them. Absolutely wreck the Flagellants. Their Crypt Ghouls are worth 100 less gold. It's not like they're anything special. It's not like everyone's always saying, oh, Crypt Ghouls are an amazing unit in this game, and they're kind of like they're the top of the bottom tier units, right? No one's out there proclaiming how good Crypt Ghouls are in this game, and they lose very easily to a unit that costs 100 less gold to them, which is a unit I would like to see them beat quite handily. Yeah, Crypt Ghouls didn't even lose half of their units. They absolutely obliterated the Flagellants, and I said the Flagellants right now are in a terrible place. They are actually the definition of trash, which usually I don't like. Trash talking units and stuff like that, but they just are such a poor position. And I've heard it said, and a lot of times people say, oh, this unit's trash or this unit's trash, and it turns out they're not as bad as people think when you do the testing. So just to demonstrate, okay, so Crypt Ghouls are 500. What if we give the Flagellant 9 chevrons? And that will give them an extra, where's the base unit? That'll give them an extra 12 stat points in melee attack and melee defense. 38 melee attack, 16. So extra 12 stat points. How does this fight turn out. So I just want to demonstrate how this fight actually turns out when I give them 12 extra stat points, because when I go over the improvements that I would like to see, there's going to be a lot of stat changes in my suggestions, and I wanted to demonstrate that there's a lot of room to give them a lot of stats. But so we'll just get this going. We got the crypt ghouls here, and now the crypt ghouls still, well, they're close. They only have 2 less stat points still, even with that. And unfortunately, these guys are going here. Sometimes the crypt ghouls will actually win this fight, and they're not going to win. Well, maybe they're going to win. I don't know. It's really close. Sometimes they win this. Usually, though, it's pretty close. You run this test 10 times, it's going to be generally really close. Sometimes the crypt ghouls win. Sometimes the Flagellants win. It's really just to demonstrate that even with 9 chevrons, yeah, okay, the crypt ghouls won. And we'll just end that battle. It's usually like 84, 75. Yeah, they're really close. Sometimes the Flagellants win, sometimes the crypt ghouls win. It's basically even. And that's after I've given them, again, a big chunk of stats. Like, we're talking 12 extra stat points in melee attack and melee defense, which is one of the things I want to highlight. Is they have lots of room to move on stats, but which stats should they move on and what should they look like? And I'm just going to make some suggestions because I would like this unit to be really interesting. I know this is not a Dowie unit, and usually it's not that I don't pay a whole lot of attention to other units that are not Dowie, but I would like all units to have a use and to be interesting. I want this game to improve for everyone, and which will improve it for me, which is why I think about how do I improve these. So I want to go to a stat card that I pulled directly off of, I don't know what version this is, but it's directly off the Games Workshop website, Games Workshop UK. You can go and see it yourself. It's right there. So this is for Flagellants. And so this is going to be the basis of some of the improvements I would like to see for the Flagellants. So basically, the description of the Flagellants are: a unit of Flagellants has 10 or more models. Flagellants march into war waving signs proclaiming their faith and ringing bells to terrify unbelievers. Units of Flagellants launch themselves at the foe armed with a mixture of castigating flails and clubs. So some of their abilities they have is a prophet. The leader of this unit is a prophet. And it says you can re-roll failed hit rolls for a prophet, but the leader of this unit is a prophet. That kind of says that maybe a prophet might encourage other units, which is really cool. So I think that might be a good ability to add. And I'm going to go to the spreadsheet in a bit, and I'll go over the abilities. Their specific abilities. Glorious Martyrs. Flagellants make 1 additional attack in the combat phase if any models from the unit have been slain earlier in that turn. If 5 or more models have been slain earlier in that turn, then they make 2 additional attacks. So it sounds like as units die, they do more damage. Very simple, easy to do. Fanatical Fury. You can re-roll hits and wound rolls for Flagellants if they charge during the same turn. So charge is important. I'm going to talk about what I want to do, some of the suggestions I have, and we'll go over those. But the last thing, which is really cool and very interesting, is Reckless Abandon. When all hope is lost, a Flagellant will fling himself at the enemy with reckless abandon, heedless of his own survival. Each time a Flagellant flings himself at the army, select an enemy within 6 inches and roll a dice. On a 4 or more, the unit suffers a mortal wound before the foe can slay the frenzied Flagellant. It's sort of like how Slayers, even if they get their heads chopped off, they still take a swing. If there are no enemy, and this is the interesting part, if there are no enemy units within 6 inches of the Flagellant, instead bashes himself to death with his own flail and is removed from play. So that's kind of really hardcore and very interesting. So I'll go to the improvements I want to see with the Flagellants. So first of all, I wanted to remove Frenzy and remove the Strength of the Penitent as they stand. Right, I want new abilities. So with just removing this frees up +8 melee attack, +14 melee defense, +12% physical resistance, +8% charge bonus, and +12% weapon damage. And we already know that even against crypt ghouls with +12 additional to this stat points in melee attack and melee defense, they still are even up, and I want to make them better. So anyways, so the additions that I would like to see to the Flagellants. Base, I think they should increase their base health by 5-ish per model, which represents their immunity to pain and makes them a better tar pit unit. Even if you can't use them for their intended function, they can last a little bit longer. So I think you'd have to test versus base infantry, because against basic infantry, they should still lose value, but not as much as they're losing right now. And that if you bring them and they're there's no units that cause fear or terror, they can still be useful at least somewhat. As a base ability, they should get Profit, which encourages nearby units. There are very few Empire units that have the Encourage ability, and I think this would be a perfect one. You know, it's a very cheap way to get Encourage on the field, and a way these units could be useful, even if they don't have any units with Fear and Terror, and I'm going to get to that. So the last thing I think should be in the base changes are they should get their Glorious Martyrs. So this is part of the right here, the Glorious Martyrs, is when they are less than 50% health, they increase their weapon strength by 15%. It's not as powerful as other effects, but a nod to the fact that they want to die. And it's useful against all. This weapon strength addition could be 25%, it could be 20%. This is something you could play with. It's the concept that's important here. So these are all base abilities that will be useful no matter what. Now, this is where I think Flagellants could become really interesting. You could make it so that if Flagellants are around a unit that causes fear, like any undead unit, and some units just cause fear, then it procs their ability called Fanatical Fury. So when they're near a unit that causes fear, they get plus 15 melee attack for 10 seconds. Or plus 20, something like that, but plus 15 at least for 10 seconds. So anytime they're near a unit that causes fear, such as an undead unit, they get this plus 15 melee attack. And that would make for an interesting unit. Lastly, Terror. Reckless Abandon. So this is where they throw themselves at the enemy, which I think is super cool. And if they don't have an enemy nearby, they actually flog themselves to death. But we can't actually do that in this game, but we can sort of represent it. So Reckless Abandon. When they are near a unit that causes terror, they see the end is near, and it triggers for 10 seconds, minus 10 melee defense. So their melee defense would go to 0. Plus 20 melee attack, so they net plus 10 stats, plus 25% charge bonus, plus 25% weapon strength, and plus 25% speed. So when they see the end is coming, they should look terror in the eyes. They should look directly into terror and see their ultimate salvation. So this, I think, would make them interesting, fun, and a useful unit in many situations, something to play around, and it would be something to play around for units that cause fear and terror. So units that cause fear and terror have nothing really to play around. Like, Cavalry has to play around units with anti-large. So this would be a very interesting unit, is you would actually, if you brought units that had fear and terror, and your Empire opponent brought a unit of Flagellants or two, you know, you would want to stay away from proccing. So play around this by staying away from the Flagellants, so you did not proc their extra abilities if you could do it. And sometimes you can't. I mean, Flagellants would be a staple pick against the undead, meaning the Vampire Counts, the Tomb Kings, and the Vampire Coast. But the Vampire Counts, the Tomb Kings, and the Vampire Coast all have tools. They all have tools that could deal with Flagellants. For example, you could the Tomb Kings bring lots of archers. I mean, these things have no armor. Archers would totally mess them up. So Tomb Kings could counterplay. Now, this doesn't mean that this is the kind of thing that makes games interesting and fun. So someone might bring a lot of archers of the Tomb Kings to counter Flagellants, and then if the Empire player brings no Flagellants, you've brought in these archers for not their intended purpose. And that's what can make sort of this mind game of what army are you going to pick and counter pick, and it can make picks much more interesting. Same with the Vampire Coast. Maybe that's a reason to bring your deck droppers with bombs, you know, because they would be so effective against Flagellants and Vampire Counts. Maybe that's a reason to bring, you know, this spell or that spell, or something that would do particularly well against Flagellants that you might not normally bring, like an ethereal unit. You know, the Flagellants may get this extra weapon damage, but it might not be as good against an ethereal unit. I don't know. Like there are ways to try and play around this and make it interesting, but the idea is, right now Flagellants are absolutely awful. That is just a straight up fact. Now, there are some situations where they're not completely terrible, and that's if they're facing, something like a Vargulf. They can do very well in that situation. And maybe there are some niche situations where you just want a tar pit unit as the Empire, and they can still be reasonable in that. But I'd like to see them more reasonable, where you take advantage of them being a tar pit by making them more of a tar pit and making them more interesting. Okay, yeah, by giving them extra health. Now, they would still die quickly to other units. Remember, we're removing a lot of stats that are there, and we're pushing them into these fear and terror mechanics to make them more interesting, and we're replacing those stats with health to make them better as a tar pit unit. And that profit encourage units, really cool. Glorious Martyrs, less than 50% health, you get increased weapon strength. It could be 15%, could be 30%, who knows. And Fanatical Fury, when you're near a unit that causes fear, any undead unit or any unit that causes fear, it triggers your Fanatical Fury. So it's something to play around, but it will also make Flagellants better in situations where they're unbreakable. Comes in useful as it is, but really it plays into this sort of lore and the idea of what they are. And Reckless Abandon, I love the idea that if they're near terror, they see the final end is coming, they get 0 melee defense plus melee attack. They're faster, they're better charge bonus, they have more speed, they have better weapon strength, and they just go all in. And I think that would make for a fun unit. Anyways, I would love to hear from you as to your thoughts on the Flagellants, and like, you see the Tattersouls once in a while in builds, and you will see a unit of Flagellants once in a while in builds. It's not that, but they're just they're not terribly interesting. And I think imagine the difference if Empire had a unit that, if you brought fear and terror, you would have to play around them. It would be like spears versus cavalry or anti-infantry, or these types of units would make for a bit of a more interesting fight. And the idea that they could have encourage, that would make them somewhat useful, even if they're not going to be in a match where there's fear and terror, because these spearmen with shields, swordsmen, like the lower level state troops, and even including handgunners and where are they? They're crossbowmen and these types of units. Yeah, here they're crossbowmen, free company militia. They're all low leadership. So Flagellants, having that encourage ability, might be useful in terms of a one-of pick here or there in builds. So it could make for really fun stuff. So anyways, I would love to hear from you in the comments. Love to hear your thoughts. This is kind of the fun part of doing this analysis, is presenting an idea and then discussing it in the comments. And even if you don't have anything to say, just drop by and say hi. I love comments. It's my favorite thing about doing this. I know I say it all the time, but it's worth repeating because it makes this hobby much more interesting and fun for myself. So with that said, I hope you found it interesting, and I will see you soon.